We're joined this morning by Stephen Reid and Grace Scanlon from Ernst & Young. So welcome, and welcome everybody else. Do you have any apologies?
Yes, Convener, we've got an apology from Councillor Coleman. I've also just noticed that Councillor Nimmo's left the meeting just now. He was on, I don't know if he's having difficulties. We'll try and catch him if he doesn't come back on. But we've just got one apology, Councillor Coleman.
Next item, are there any declarations of interest? No hands up. No declarations of interest. Turning to item 3, the minute of the Audit Committee held on the 24th of August 2020. We've all had a chance to read it. An extensive minute. Are there any matters arising or any questions any members wish to make in respect of the minute? Are we happy to approve that? Thank you.
Happy to agree.
Turning to item 4, the annual audit report to members and the audit controller. I think, Stuart, are you going to introduce this? Or?
I think it's me, Convener. Brian.
Brian, right. Finance. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to all. What we have here is the first of 3 interrelated reports on your agenda this morning, reflecting the culmination of the annual accounts and audit for the financial year 1920. I'm happy to report that EY's conclusion to their work is that there's no qualification to the accounts. That's always gratifying. There were a couple of adjustments, as you'll see noted at paragraph 413. Section 4.2 of the cover report deals with the 4 wider scope or best value elements, and I'll quickly run through each of those. The first one is the financial sustainability, and that's assessed as a red under the RAG rating by the auditors, and that's reflecting both the COVID backcloth, which of course impacts all councils, not just Falkirk, and the matter of delivery of budget savings to meet the projected gap. It's worth noting that each and every year hitherto, the council has managed to deliver the savings necessary to achieve the closure of the gap. The next category is financial management. That's rated amber, notwithstanding the positive comments made by the auditors. The auditors are keen to see council the future savings clearly identified within the overall mix of savings, and we're happy to do that going forward. They also wish to see improvement to the management and monitoring of the capital programme. I think it's fair to say it's the nature of the beast that the capital programme will always incur slippage, and members will recall that we have undertaken work in the recent past to try and address this, but it's an issue impacting on all councils, but we'll continue our best endeavours to manage the situation and minimise slippage as best we can. But that's not going to result in there being no slippage. Governance and transparency is rated green, and clearly that's very positive and welcome. There's an outstanding point relating to the council directors and the Falkirk Stadium, but we expect that to be resolved soon as part of the wider clarification of the way forward on the HQ and the stadium being an integral part of that. The fourth and last element in that best value mix is VFM, value for money, and that's ranked amber. You can see positive comments are made on performance monitoring and our performance on benchmarking comparators. We will take action to address EY's comments on public performance reporting. The recommendations are stated at section 2, but I'm sure, Convener, before you and the committee want to turn your attention to that, you'll want to hear directly from Stephen and Grace from EY to speak in more detail to their report. Before doing so, Convener, can I just thank EY for their work during this audit? Clearly, it's been a particularly challenging environment with COVID, which has inevitably impacted the normal modus operandi and made it very challenging. And we will, as we always do at the conclusion of an audit, meet and discuss lessons to be learned, which can be harnessed and deployed for the next round. So, Convener, with your approval and agreement, if we could perhaps pass over to Stephen and Grace to actually speak to their report. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Brian. Who's going first? From Mr. Young.
Thank you, Convener. I'll start off, and good morning, everyone. And Brian, thank you for those comments. My intention, Convener, is probably just to say a few words. Brian's very ably picked up a high-level summary of the key findings within the report. And then I'll pass over to Grace Scanlon to touch on some of the detail, just to draw the committee's attention. Taking a step back, first of all, though, I think it's probably worth just reflecting that the purpose of this report is to support elected members in scrutinising the financial statements and holding officers to account over the past year, the period under audit, both in terms of the financial statements and the results reported, but also in respect of the wider scope dimensions, as Brian discussed. I did just want to take a moment also, Convener, as Brian did, to talk about the financial statement preparation and audit process this year. Clearly, that's been an atypical process, and an atypical environment, which seems somewhat of an understatement. But I would like to place on record my thanks to Brian, Danny and the rest of the team for supporting us in discharging our responsibilities. It's not been easy doing that in this environment, and we are grateful. And as Brian said, I think it's highly likely that we will be undertaking some form of similar approach to the 2021 audit, at least for the interim. And so once this audit is complete, then as ever, and as we normally do, we'll sit down and harness any areas of good practice and areas that we collectively need to focus on. I do intend to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, as Brian discussed, and through the audit process, we've agreed with management 2 adjustments to the draft financial statements and three unadjusted differences. We're in the process of just concluding our work around the disclosures in respect of the impact that COVID has had and is having on the Council around what we call the going concern disclosures. And there's no debate, the Council is absolutely a going concern. This is just about completing the process in that respect. And that will also lead into finalising the exact form of our opinion. Brian's very ably summarised the key findings in relation to wider scope, Convener, so I don't intend at this point to go into any greater detail. I will ask Grace just to pick up on a few aspects of those. And we have made four grade 1 recommendations in the action plan within the appendices and 1 grade 2 recommendation for officers to take forward. Management have provided responses to those, and all of those recommendations have been agreed. So with that, Convener, let me hand over to Grace to pick up a few aspects of the findings from the audit.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to pick up a few areas that we wanted to kind of draw to the committee's attention. So first of all, we did receive a really good set of financial statements and working papers, really, despite the impact of COVID and in the end changes to the finance team. So actually, in terms of the impact of COVID, then it really was just during the audit process that we really felt that. There were a couple of areas I wanted to draw to the committee's attention. So first of all, on page 15 of our report, we refer to a significant audit adjustment relating to the council's housing valuation. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background to that. The council has got a rolling valuation programme which covers all of the assets of the council over a 5-year period. And within the programme, non-operational property was due to be revalued in 2019-20, which only represents around about 6% of the council's assets. So we highlighted the risk about being able to demonstrate that asset valuations are up to date back in actually our debrief process for the audit last year. And the finance team agreed to commission the 2021 planned housing valuation early to inform the audit this year. So that decision actually became more important with the onset of COVID and the valuation uncertainty that's been highlighted by RICS, among others. So when the valuation came back, the finance team reviewed the key factors in that movement and concluded that the vast majority of that movement could be attributed to 2019-20. So we think of that as really a good catch. So it avoided a lot of difficulty in demonstrating that the asset valuations were up to date, but also avoided a significant prior year adjustment in 2021. Within the page 15, we also refer to an unadjusted difference relating to property, plant and equipment valuation. That was a judgmental difference that we attributed during the audit, but we expect that adjustment really to reduce as we finalise the report because of new information that's come to light that changes that value. Brian has already summarised a lot of what I would probably say on wider scope. I would agree in terms of the financial sustainability that really that RED assessment is reflecting the uncertainty around funding post-COVID and I guess in the longer term. I would highlight that we were really impressed by the work that was undertaken to prepare the refreshed corporate plan and business plan in September this year, particularly the level of stakeholder engagement. But the updated medium-term financial plan does contain a remaining budget gap of around about 29 million over the next 3 years. So while financial flexibility should help to manage that gap in the shorter term, then in the medium and longer term, then we feel that member and officers' focus needs to remain on that financial sustainability challenge. Within financial management, then overall, we did conclude that the council has demonstrated good financial management, but continues to report significant overspends, particularly within children's services, despite the focus on residential care, in particular for looked after children. Similarly, as Brian said, then we were hoping that following internal audits review last year that the slippage against the capital programme would have been reduced by a greater factor this year, but we would agree with Brian that it is really difficult and it does impact quite a lot of councils as well. In terms of governance and transparency, then we did assess that was green. We did note the change in audit committee convener in particular, and think that the arrangements put in place are a pragmatic solution. We've also had discussions with the governance team about how we can support that in the future. Finally, on value for money, as Brian said, then generally the council services do perform well against national comparators, and so our assessment of Amber is really focused on the new requirements put on the council by the Accounts Commission in their direction. So as we outline on page 36, we felt that there was scope to consider public performance reporting arrangements in the context of those changed expectations. I'll stop there and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Grace and Stephen. Before I open that out to the members, I have just a question of information, really. It's around the actual revaluation of the pensions. Can you just explain the Goodwin or MacLeod Goodwin judgment and what that was about and why it brought about the changes that you've made today? pension valuation or action, pension liabilities?
So both of those are actually judgments that happened post year end. So the adjustments that we have identified there are really just kind of timing difficulties between when the council received their first actuarial report and when it was updated during the audit process. So I think the same thing happened last year. Goodwin is a new liability, but is very trivial in terms of the overall size of the pension fund. So not such a big change there.
Okay, thanks. Any members' questions? Councillor Reid.
Yes, I think each annual report has some difference regarding valuation as to when it takes place. And is Council House revaluation an annual exercise?
No, it's not. So sorry, I'll just take this. It's not. So the code requires that all assets are subject to revaluation every 5 years. One of the areas that we often have kind of discussions and challenge with management is around about how management can keep that up to date. Because I mean, as we've seen over a 4-year period, then the asset valuation changed really quite significantly. So it is one of the recommendations that we have asked the finance team to go and look at around about how they can make sure that that asset valuation keeps up to date. So there are different councils do it through, for example, looking at indices or looking at interim valuations, just to make sure that that valuation feels about right.
It's just that there was a period when property was zooming up in value, both private and council. That's maybe settled down a bit now. 85 million sounds a lot, but over what, 15,000 houses, it's not very much. So do we expect next year for this reference not to appear, since there'll be no revaluation?
So the process that we've agreed with the district valuer, which is very kind of them, they will update that report as at the 31st of March 2021. So there might be a small impact, but what we're hoping is that it won't be another huge impact. And thereafter then, just because we all share that kind of greater understanding about how the valuation works, then it should be easier to keep that up to date.
Okay, thank you. The other question is about the Community Stadium Limited. Politicians have been promised reports for at least the last 2 years, I think. And we did expect one to council next month, hopefully. One particular question is that Mrs. Geisler, the former Director of Development Services, was a director. Was that appointment ex officio, and does it transfer to Mr. Duff?
Through you, Councillor Reid, that's probably a question better answered by management rather than ourselves.
Yes. I did expect it. Someone coming in from this side.
Douglas, have you got any comment on that? Yeah.
It is something that we're working on at the present time. So we are working on a report to bring forward to the council to update on the stadium and seek a decision as to the way forward with the makeup of the stadium company. Clearly, the decision that was taken at the council meeting has a material effect on how that might move forward, and that's something we're considering at the present time. In the course of that, we are also looking to deal with the question of directorships of the company, and we're in discussion with colleagues at the present time to recommend the way forward on that. So we will give some clarity when that report comes forward.
The question of performance monitoring, that's page 52. It shows that in comparative terms we're well ahead of most local authorities, the exception being corporate services. Now, I suspect that may be attributable to the way that corporate services features within each council's framework, but could we expand on that a little bit? Again, that's maybe one for officers rather than auditors.
Anyone to come in on that? Stuart.
Thank you, Convener. We're reporting our all our local government benchmarking framework information through the scrutiny committee, and I think the scrutiny committee before last we reported our GPF indicators for the last year published. So I'm happy to provide Councillor Reid with the granular detail of the indicators that pick up on corporate services, and he can come back to me on any particular questions that he's got, having had a chance to consider the individual indicators.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean that our, what might be termed overheads, are necessarily higher than those of other local authorities.
It's actually the opposite of that, Convener. I think from memory we have the third lowest support service charges compared to total gross costs for councils. So we actually have relatively low support service costs compared to other councils in Scotland.
Yes, I think knowing yourself and your staff, I suspected that would be the case. Thank you.
So, any other questions, Councillor? Anybody else want to come? Anybody else have any questions? Councillor Meiklejohn.
Excuse me. Thank you, Nigel. Obviously, the subject of our capital programme and the monitoring of that has been ongoing over the last number of years, because there has been concerns with it around the slippage. And having put a new monitoring process in place, we've obviously continued to see slippage, and I appreciate that COVID's haven't had an overlay on that. However, what I would like to know is what more can we do, taking into account the situation around COVID, in order to try and get some of that back on track, and look at how our monitoring regime can be further augmented going forward. So I think our capital programme is going to be quite critical as part of our recovery plan, and I just wondered if Brian could maybe expand on that, or other officers may want to have a comment on that.
Thanks, Cecil. Douglas, have you any comment there?
It's certainly something we are attending to. We're preparing the new capital programme just now, and clearly having a very close eye to the risks of slippage given the current circumstances that we face. We have seen in recent tender returns some increase in cost coming through as a consequence of contractors having to attend to the various safety measures that have been necessary as a consequence of COVID, and that's giving some concern in terms of future project costs. So we are having to attend to this very carefully, and its effects not just for the current programme but for the programme coming forward. So the report, when it comes on the capital programme to the budget meeting in February, will need to allow for the effects of this to be taken into account.
Happy with that, Cecil?
Yes, to a certain extent, and I don't know whether Brian wants to say anything more about the project management, the monitoring of the actual budget. You know, Douglas can look at the project management aspect, but it's the financial monitoring of that. So I don't know whether Brian wants to.
Brian, would you like to come in there?
Thank you, Convener. The overall management of the capital programme is very much corporate undertaking. I mean, ultimately, the management at an individual project level is primarily the responsibility of the sponsoring service, and for the most part, they'll be working with their colleagues in development services for technical support. Where finance comes in is in terms of the strategic overview of the programme, i.e. the aggregation of the circumstances and status of each of those projects to give us a strategic impact. So we, through the good offices of the Corporate Capital Monitoring Working Group, which meets regularly during the course of the year, seeks to take that overview, and indeed that then informs a periodic report that comes up to members. But I guess really what I'm saying is ultimately the responsibility and hard action for managing projects does take place at the individual project level, and our focus has been on trying to message home that it's about accountability and responsibility at the service level, as I say, supported by technical colleagues in development services, to ensure, and also the monitoring process is only as good as the information flowing from those sources. So that's another area we've been working quite hard on and focusing to try and ensure the intelligence that's coming through, which informs our reporting in turn to members, is as robust and reliable as it can be. But I suppose to round off, it's just recognising that the word slippage is reflecting real world things that do happen and do intrude on the capacity to deliver the capital programme. Weather is obviously one, and we're coming into winter most obviously. Planning issues can intrude, gaining cooperation and necessary work from utilities is a frequent factor intruding on the progression of the planned capital line. So these things are regrettably and unfortunately and frustratingly out with our direct control, and as I say, do exist in the real world. And my final comment is we do take it seriously. We do endeavour to minimise slippage, and indeed on the back of the comments that have been made at this meeting and as have been made at previous meetings by members, I will take it on board along with Douglas Duff to take it back via the Capital Programme Working Group and back to services to re-emphasise members' concerns, as highlighted by the auditors, that this is an area we need to continue to direct attention to and manage as best as is within our gift. Thank you, Convener.
Nigel, can I have another question?
Of course you can.
It's actually in relation to our medium-term financial plan, and that obviously the budget working group has been member officer budget working group has been re-established, and our current position has been for this financial year is not as pressured as we anticipated, which is a positive thing. But however, going forward, our future budget gaps, particularly next year, is significant, and what we don't have is enough options available to us at this time in order to be able to meet that budget gap going forward. Obviously that's a major risk, and I just wanted to highlight that that's a concern to members, and there is a need to identify how those savings are going to be met very quickly in order to be able to present a budget, a balanced budget going forward, but also recognising there's a lot of uncertainties around. But I think as an audit committee, I think we need to express the need to have some options on the table that we can start to discuss and start to flesh out going forward. And there's a sense of urgency around that. So I don't know whether any officers would want to comment on that.
Anyone want to comment on that? Kenneth. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, convener. I mean, we're acutely aware of that need, and clearly the comments in the report about financial sustainability underline the need for that work to be taken forward, with some pace and energy, and that's something we're very focused on as a corporate management team at the current time. I mean, there's a couple of elements to this. One, as the leader rightly says, is about the identification of the options. And I think that's a particular challenge for 21-22, as has been discussed before. And the other issue then, which is actually highlighted in the executive summary, is that critical member role in terms of engagement and collective political leadership. So a significant onus on officers to bring forward that suite of options, and then a real challenge for elected members as well in terms of that collective leadership. And I suppose the reasons why we've had these very open and broad-ranging discussions at the Budget Working Group in the last couple of weeks about the various services and the options and challenges that they face is precisely to create that groundwork so that members can give these issues serious consideration. We got a briefing for all members later this week. So I think these 2 points both need to be emphasised: the absolute need for officers to have that range of options coming forward, which give members that ability to make choices about budget options for the year ahead, and then that collective political leadership across the council to find good solutions in terms of the challenges, the 2021-22 budget and beyond.
Thank you, Kenneth. Any other questions or comments?
Convener?
Alan?
Yeah, just on the back of what's been said, can I just start off by apologising for attending late this morning? I've had some IT problems and I had to reboot my laptop, so I missed the first couple of items. And I know you've given me permission to read out a short statement at some point, but just on the back of what's been said already regarding the budget gap and the options that we might possibly have in the future, I've been contacted by a number of folk at council staff trade union reps who've raised what I see as legitimate concerns regarding the process that this council uses in relation to how members of staff raise issues and report what they see as maybe suspicious, questionable, inefficient or wasteful spending, or even suggest cost savings to management. Now, according to the trade union reps I've spoken to, this is very rarely encouraged or acted upon. And you've got to ask yourself, with that in mind, how can a member of staff report something when it's possibly their manager that's responsible for the problem? And according to these two reps, examples are highlighted to management on a regular basis, but they tend to be ignored. Or even worse, the person bringing it to the attention of management are looked on as possibly troublemakers. I'm just wondering if we could get a report back to this committee or even the executive at a future date detailing exactly what the policy and procedures are in this respect. Because the staff are quite well placed to identify where savings can be made, and I think that really needs to be taken into account. But I think we need to have further information as to the input from staff in relation to this, because this seems to be quite a big problem. That's on that, convener. And I know you said that you would give me the opportunity to read out a very short statement, and I'll do that just now. It's on the back of the SNP's decision that was made recently, and I would just like to take the opportunity to commiserate with Councillor Meiklejohn and not being selected as the SNP candidate for Falkirk East in next year's Scottish Parliament elections. That instead the SNP have chosen to parachute a career politician from outside the Falkirk area with no local connections, one who resigned the SNP whip in 2015 and her own party's NEC refused to endorse her as a candidate for the Westminster election. Now, I find this astonishing. It shows not only the contempt the SNP have for voters in Falkirk, but also the supine nature of the local SNP, who have so little faith in their own representatives. How can you fight for Falkirk when you will not even fight for your local members? I'll leave it at that, Convener, and thanks very much for your indulgence in relation to that. But if I could get a reply to my first issue that I raised regarding the staff involvement, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Could I possibly just initially respond to that? Sure. I don't think it's appropriate that comment be made about an internal selection process be made in this committee, and I think it sends the wrong message out, an audit committee in particular, and I'm really disappointed that Councillor Nimmo has chosen to do that. In relation to the comments about staff involvement, I'll leave much of that to officers, but I have to say that there's been very good engagement through the tripartite and with the trade unions, a number of levels, and those particular issues have not come to the fore, but I'm sure either Stuart or Karen will be able to give more information in relation to that.
I concur. I wasn't aware of the nature of the statement being made, and certainly I don't think it was appropriate for this committee. Who would like to come back on the staff involvement? Sorry, Pat, I'll come to you in a minute. We just need an answer to Alan's question regarding staff involvement. Stuart, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. A bit like the comments that the Leader of the Council has made, there's a weekly call involving representatives from HR and the trade unions, and these particular comments haven't been raised on any of the calls, on these weekly calls, nor have they been made prior to the COVID outbreak. There are a number of ways in which employees can participate and are encouraged to participate in the budget process, whether that's through ideas within their teams and team meetings, their contributions at Council of the Future, work groups, and so on and so forth. I'm happy to produce a briefing paper which we can submit to members that provides information in the various ways in which employees and trade unions can contribute budget savings. There's no, there's no doubt that employees on the ground have the best ideas on how improvements can be made, because they are the people who see what the processes are which we operate on a day-to-day basis and the improvements that can be made. So I'd like to think that we would encourage employees to contribute as much as possible, but as I've said, I'm happy to produce a briefing note for papers that outlines the various ways in which employees are encouraged to participate in the budget process.
Thank you, Stuart. You were wanting to come in?
Yes, moving back to the report, there may be something you're going to do yourself, but I'd like to thank Stephen and Grace for their presentations to the committees over the years. I'm using the past tense, perhaps loosely there. I find it very helpful in a very difficult subject, and it's almost readable, but it's very well put, and thank you very much for making it easier for us lay people. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Any other questions from members? I just echo what Councillor Reid has said regarding the auditors. We're obviously very pleased to get an unqualified audit report. in difficult times. They've produced it. We got over the wire, I'm sure not without a lot of hard graft, but also I think I would echo the thanks to Brian and Danny and the rest of the finance team again for getting the annual accounts together in such extraordinary circumstances. So thanks to them. Just turning to the recommendations, committee is asked to note the annual audit report for 2019-2020 and to note the action plan appended to the annual audit report. We're happy to approve these recommendations.
Agreed.
Thank you. Now, moving to item 5, which is the annual accounts for 2019-2020. This committee, of course, considered the draft accounts at its August meeting, and we now have the fully audited accounts before us. Is this for you, Brian, to do? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, convener. So you have a short cover report, short relative to the 100+ pages of the accounts themselves. Due to the impact of COVID, the deadline for the relevant committee of the council considering the accounts was extended from the end of September to the end of November. So clearly we comply with that. Convener, all I wanted to do was to echo your comments in terms of acknowledging the work done by Danny Kearney and Amanda Templeman and their teams. I think also somewhat chiming with Councillor Reid's comments, I think they've done a lot of work, positive work, to help present the accounts in a more reader-friendly manner with the use of graphics and colours, etc. So hopefully members will have seen the benefit of that in what otherwise is inherently a very challenging document. The recommendation is at 2-1, and myself and Danny will happily try and address any questions on the document that members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Just to comment on the management commentary. It is a very readable, straightforward document, condensing on page 90 the income and expenditure down to a quarter of a page for presentation to the public. And the balance sheet, similarly on page 93, is quite an exercise. It actually belies the complexity underlying that, but as a presentation to the public, I think it's an excellent commentary, and in particular with the addition of the effect of COVID and a little bit about Brexit on how the council finances will be affected. I think it's an excellent production. Any comments or questions from members? Councillor Reid.
Yes, please. Again, to join you in congratulating the staff, and the presentation of the report is very good. It's very confusing times in which we live in. I know personally, I don't know what date it is sometimes, and I thought I'd seen this report before and couldn't recall when, but apparently it was the last audit committee. The figure that leaps off the page is the 23% of children in our area are living in poverty. Do we have a breakdown of that over wards, and if so, could that be made available to members? Because I know in some areas, if it's 23% average, it will be far higher.
Don't know. Gary, do you want to comment on that? Gary Greenhorn.
Okay, thanks very much, Convener. I'm happy to take that offline and give Councillor Reid a breakdown of the child poverty figures as best we can on a ward-by-ward basis. It may be entirely linked to catchment areas that would be required, but hopefully the two are probably, there's some correlation between the two, but happy to take it off and give Councillor Reid information as per his request.
I think I did refer at the last meeting we discussed this to the number of young people, young employees, and hopefully that could be changed. I think we've seen the effect of young people at a recent election, about a few thousand miles away, and it seems a very low percentage that we have working for us. So are there any steps in hand? I know vacancies have to arise before we can effect anything, but is there any plan to change that figure, to increase it?
Who would like to come in on that? Karen.
Thank you, Convener. Convener, just to confirm that we do have actions in our workforce plan to take that forward. So we are working with Douglas Duff and his colleagues on how we can better promote apprenticeships across the council and encourage more training places in the council to make sure that we do help to get younger employees into our workforce and get a better balance of the age profile in our workforce, because members will recall from the workforce plan that we do indeed have quite an ageing workforce, so we do need to actually take some actions there, and we are actually doing that now.
Thank you. There's reference in page 95 to significant costs being incurred beyond 2021 because of the national economy, basically. A reference to priority being given to health, defence and police, and with local government probably coming far down the league in terms of priority. Do you have any indication of what those costs may be at this point?
Who's going to come in on that?
Convener, without quickly being able to access the page, but just going on what you've said, I think it's looking at paint level where against a backcloth of constrained resources at both Westminster and flowing through to Holyrood, there are competing, as there always are, blocks of spend or bids for an increased allocation of that constrained cake that needs to be split, so to speak. We know, particularly in the current environment, but before COVID, health tended to munch most of the cake, to continue my analogy. But we know other sectors, universities comes to mind, which have been featured quite prominently in the press, as being a sector under pressure. And each sector will have its own arguments. So clearly the Scottish Government has a difficult, ultimately political decision in terms of how it allocates resources. But we just know from notwithstanding the particular pressures induced by COVID, that in previous years, local government has tended not to do particularly well out of that exercise. So I think it's just flagging up a context that we need to be realistic about going forward in terms of resources available to us. Of course, we would normally at least get a provisional figure of our grant, which is something like over 80% of our overall resources. It dwarfs everything else by some magnitude in the budget mix. But we already know the Scottish Government, because of the particular and unique circumstances prevailing, are talking about deferring their budget till January, possibly quite late in January. So I think we need to recognise and prepare ourselves for not having this information until very late in our budget process. Though, to be realistic and fair about it, we do know from experience in recent years that due to the inevitable parliamentary approval process, the actual agreed figure tends not to be available till close to the end of January anyway. And also that figure in recent years has moved markedly from that announced at the time of the normal Scottish Government budget in mid-December. So I think it's just alerting us to the, particularly each year is challenging. We say that when we stand up in February and present the budget. This year has presented uniquely challenging circumstances, and I think we can say with some confidence, come February next year for the budget meeting, similar comments will with some justification be made then. Hopefully that gives you some context, convener.
Thank you, Brian.
If I may make a pedantic point at this point.
Sure.
I apologise in advance. Page 155. It says, in the past, the Council has set a de minimis level for capital expenditure. I felt my Latin teacher turn in his grave this morning. It's de minimis, not de minimis. That is very pedantic. Apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Are there any other members' questions or comments? If not, can we approve the recommendation that recommend to Council that the audited annual accounts are approved?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right, next item is the Temperance Trust annual accounts. And again, I guess, Brian, is this yourself who's presenting?
Yes, good. Yeah. Yes. So you have before you the final item in the trio of accounts and audit related reports for 1920 with respect to the Temperance Trust. Not much really to say, convener. The accounts, which show a healthy balance, have an unqualified audit certificate, and you can see the recommendation at para 2.1.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions or comments from members regarding Temperance Trust? Councillor Reid.
If I may make a side point of some interest to people, the trust was set up by one Dr. Aitken from the well-known Russell and Aitken family in Falkirk. And he was the meteorologist that discovered dust particles in the air, which explained the sunset at night when the refraction took place. And even to this day, that's known as the Aitken nuclei. So when he died, he left half of his money to form the Temperance Trust, because the temperance movement was very active at the time. So this gentleman is world famous, a Falkirk Baron.
Thank you for that historical information. Always good to advance our knowledge of local history. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, we're happy to approve the accounts, approve the recommendation. Yes, it's fine. Okay. And item 7 is the internal audit report, and I guess Gordon, you here? Yes, we see him. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. members will recall that the internal audit plan for this year was agreed at the last meeting of committee in August. And in presenting that plan, I tried to highlight the extent to which it would be flexible and indicative, just given the impact that COVID's had over the course of the year. While it was at that point and remains our intention to complete as much of our planned work as possible, I think it's important that internal audit resource is directed to where it adds most value. I've highlighted at paragraph 3.2 here the fact that there have been several national reports that have emphasised new risks arising as a result of COVID. One good example of that is the Audit Scotland report entitled COVID-19 Emerging Fraud Risks, which highlights things like increased remote working, an increase in cyber scams, and new grant schemes to support businesses as areas of particular risk. So taking into account what these reports have told us, I have allocated internal audit time to the areas that I've set out at paragraph 3.5 of this report. The outcomes arising from that work are set out at Appendix 2, and I think it's both reassuring and also I think it's a credit to the staff who have worked in these areas that we've been able to provide substantial assurance on each. The position in relation to our planned work is summarised at Appendix 1, and the detailed findings following from our reviews of staff wellbeing and the Scottish Housing Regulator Annual Assurance Statement, they're also set out at Appendix 2. Paragraphs 3.6 and 3.7 of the report touch on the next round of the National Fraud Initiative exercise that's just about to commence. The main reason for highlighting that within this report is that NFI exercise will also pick up on the COVID grant schemes. It will match the data from across all 32 councils and will highlight and identify any erroneous or fraudulent claims across as well as within councils. Finally, at paragraph 3.9, you'll see that there's only one internal audit recommendation that's currently outstanding beyond its agreed implementation date. That relates to review and update of the sickness absence policy. Details of that recommendation are Appendix 3, and work on that will be picked up as soon as the COVID situation allows. So finally, I just ask members to note the recommendations at section 2, and if you have any questions, I'll do my very best to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. We'd asked at the August Audit Committee for a report on what you've been doing since the lockdown, and here it is very quickly. So thank you for that prompt response and a detailed summary of the work finalised in Appendix 2. Any members' comments or questions? I see no hands. Are we all happy to approve? We note the progress of the internal audit work, the outcomes of the COVID-19 specific internal audit work to which I referred, and the ongoing work and the implementation recommendations that remain outstanding. So we're happy to approve this report.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Moving on. The last item on the agenda is the corporate risk assurance update. Again, I think that will be Gordon.
Convener for this one.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Sorry, Brian, Mr. Smith.
To be fair, it's Gordon and his team that have done all the work in preparing this, but I can front it, and if there are questions from members, I'm sure Gordon, particularly in the detail of the appendices, will be able to come in and help address those. So you have before you an update on the status of corporate risk management. The report at paras 4, 2 and 3 summarises the respective responsibilities for the Audit Committee and the Executive. The report makes the point that risk management, risk assessment are an integral part of decision making. But of course, that's been elevated to a new level, particularly with COVID. but also with Brexit looming as well. The report picks up specifically within the recommendation the three what we've termed deep dive areas that are being teed up for the executive explore. I think that's a positive development, and indeed reflects a specific request that was made by members some time ago to really get their teeth into some of these areas. I think from a governance point of view that's a very, very important development. There's quite a lot of detail in the appendices, which I alluded to earlier, and I'll just finish off by drawing you to the inevitable recommendations at section 2.1. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions or comments from members? Everybody happy with the report? Looks to be. So we agree the recommendations set out in paragraph 2. Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That concludes the business that will arrange for me to thank you all for attending, and thank you to representatives from Ernst & Young. And I should have said, my understanding is that you will be having an extra year as our external auditors. Is that correct? Welcome back.
That's correct, Convener. Next year would have been our final year, but it has been extended for 1 year. The decision was taken by the Accounts Commission several weeks ago, just recognising the environment in which we've talked about today in COVID-19 and the impact that's having.
That's excellent. We're in good hands for another year. So thank you all for attending. Have a good day.